On this lap, we drove over 21,000 kilometres in total, 16,000 kilometres with towing the caravan.
Leaving home on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, we headed west through Dubbo, where our daughter Sam, her husband Mo, and the 3 grandkids live. We spent a few days with them, then headed further west to Peterborough.
We've been this way a few times and we were keen to get away from the cooler weather, so although we stopped at a couple of places on the Stuart Highway that heads all the way through Alice Springs and on to Darwin, our first major stop really was at Ormiston Gorge. This is a favourite place of ours about 100 kilometres or so west of Alice Springs in the heart of Australia. After 4 nights free camping at Ormiston Gorge, we headed further north and passed through a town called Aileron, which has a 7-metre high statue known as Aileron Man.
Further north, we had 2 nights at the Devil's Marbles. This is a place we've always found to be stunning during the day, and more so at night. Here, you are a couple of 100 kilometres away from light pollution caused by any town or city, and the night sky is stunning. We actually took a lot of photos of the night sky during our time away, and some of them will feature later in this video. After the Devil's Marbles, further north we ventured back into some of our favourite places, Mataranka, Litchfield National Park and Berry Springs. These destinations have wonderful places for swimming, and all of the grey nomads, as we're known, go to these places with pool noodles, so they just sit there and float. The current just takes you gently down past water lilies. At Mataranka, we also saw some brolgas. Their flight somehow seems to be a contradictory mix of grace and awkwardness.
At Mataranka, we also came across a guy called Nathan Whippy Griggs, who would ask the audience for their favourite tune. He'd then use his mobile phone and Spotify to play it back, and then would crack his whips in time with the music. He was quite brilliant. Further north into the Litchfield Park, where we've been a number of times, but this was the first time we'd stayed overnight. We actually stayed for 3 nights and tried a number of their swimming holes as well as some waterfalls. Some we couldn't swim at because crocodiles were still around, but most of them were safely accessible. We also enjoyed exploring the termite mounds in Litchfield before we headed further north to another swimming area, Berry Springs, just 30 or so kilometres south of Darwin. Here there are more spring water pools that are frequented by rainbow bee eaters.
We then turned around and headed back south, stopping at Edith Falls, which we had missed on the way up. We also stayed at Catherine, and once again under the spectacular night sky. And the sunrises weren't bad either. After Catherine, we started our trek further west through Victoria River, which is just a very small settlement in the middle of nowhere. Here we hopped on a helicopter flight just to take in the vast spaces of the Northern Territory.
On to Lake Argyll, which is a man-made lake formed by the Argyll Dam. At its peak, the dam holds a staggering 10.7 billion cubic metres of water, which is more than 18 times the size of Sydney Harbour. One of the activities at Lake Argyll, which we've done previously and enjoyed again, is a sunset cruise. One of the cruise's highlights is an opportunity just to float in the lake and enjoy a drink or two as the sun sets. We were here in the dry season, but the lake was still very full and the spillway, as you can see, was really running very, very quickly.
In the town of Kununurra, which is only about 30 kilometres from Lake Argyll, there's a river crossing which is still closed because, although it's the dry season, it's been wetter up here than usual. And about a day's drive from Kununurra is Purnululu National Park, which features the Bungle Bungle formations, which we've visited in the past, but it was too hard to get to this time. But just outside of Kununurra is the Miramar National Park, which is also known as the Mini Bungles, and the striations on the rocks here are reminiscent of what you see in the Bungle Bungles.
Further west and the long trek to Broome continued. Although it's sort of a desert up here, it's still quite green and the boa trees can be quite spectacular to look at. One of our favourite places to camp in the past was Numbin Cliffs, but this time we stayed at Mary Pool instead. Once again, the night skies were something just to sit down and marvel at. We did stop for morning tea at Numbin Cliffs and just enjoyed the peace and quiet, as there were only 2 or 3 other vans here and those people were parked a long distance from where we stopped. Unfortunately, like many places up here, there were a few million flies to welcome us.
In Broome, the drone gave us an opportunity to really take in the colours of the water and the red sands. We also paid the famous Cable Beach a visit at sunset. Having previously ridden camels at the pyramids in Egypt, we decided to give the camel ride a miss and just enjoy the scenery. From Broome, we headed further north, up the Dampier Peninsula to stay in 2 Aboriginal communities at Lombardina and the Jajaran community. We had a kayak and snorkeling tour out of Lombardina. No one seemed to be worried about crocodiles, although apparently they are in the area. We were hoping to see turtles on this tour, but instead we had a long look at one of the colourful stingrays as it swam past.
Heading down the northwest coast after resupplying and getting the car serviced at Broome, we stopped at Barn Hill and 80 Mile Beach. Barn Hill was a new experience for us, and if we're in this area again, it will definitely take precedence over 80 Mile Beach. The campsite is so much bigger and better organised, and the beach is swimmable, whereas the 80 Mile Beach is not. as is the case with so many places in West Australia, the sunsets are stunning at 80 Mile Beach. Further south, we came back to Port Hedland, which is a massive port with significant transport links to the mines. Further south to Karratha to watch what is known in this area as the Staircase to the Moon. Southwest to Ballara Station, a working cattle station with stunning red sands. Here we were put in the fossils area of the campground.
Not sure how I feel about that. An 80-kilometre four-wheel drive from the station is the bottom part of Exmouth Gulf. Here you can see how big the tides are in this area. And once again the drone gives a wonderful overview, not just of the vastness of the place, but also some of the stunning colours. One of the highlights of any lap around Australia for us is the opportunity to go to Ningaloo Reef. For the third time we stayed at Cape Range National Park, where you can step out of your caravan, pick up your snorkelling gear and walk just a few metres and be swimming over the reef. Well, we may have missed out on turtles when we were at Lombardina, but we certainly didn't miss out on them on the reef.
After 4 nights at Ningaloo, we drove the 50 or so kilometres back to the local town of Exmouth and stayed there for a few days just to replenish supplies and go on yet another snorkel, this time in the Gulf, where once again we saw more rays, not as colourful as the ones at Lombardina. We also saw fish, coral and of course more turtles. While at Exmouth, we had a look around the township and went down to their marina, where we watched one of the pilot boats being hauled out for repairs.
Leaving the Ningaloo area, we headed down south to Carnarvon, which is just a very short drive from the Quabba blowholes and lighthouse. Although there were whales further north, here they seemed to be much closer to shore. And again, the drone gave us a unique view of this area. One of the reasons we timed the trip as we did was because August to October in West Australia is famous for its wildflowers, and we really wanted to see them. But not before a quick visit to Kalbarri, where we came across a thorny devil and revisited nature's window and had our first and last ever ride on quad bikes.
There were a few wildflowers in the Kalbarri area, but it wasn't until we got to Malabar and Three Springs that we saw what we had been anticipating, and that is the stunning display of carpets of wildflowers of different colours. After the wildflowers, we headed to Cervantes and spent half a day and sunset at Nambung National Park, which is also called the Pinnacles. Even though the weather was really starting to turn quite cold, we were fortunate to have a sunny day with minimal wind, and spending time here was not at all unpleasant.
But we were now at the tail end of winter, and the bottom corner of West Australia does get very cold. So rather than heading further south, we decided it was time to head east across the Nullarbor. We've done the Nullarbor 3 times now, and although there are some people who say it's a boring drive, we've always enjoyed it, even though it's long, with very few curves and not a lot of trees. Slight detours off the main road can be quite stunning. We stayed at the Bunda Cliffs, just over the border between West Australia and South Australia. A lot of campsites along this area are now closed because some of the cliffs are being undermined by the ocean and are falling into the water. Where we stayed, back a little bit from the cliff, was safe, and we really enjoyed our night there.
Once again, Garry enjoyed taking photos of the Milky Way.
East from Bunda Cliffs is the Head of the Bight, which is famous for having whales visited at this time of year.
After a night near the Head of the Bight, we headed further east into the town of Ceduna, which is an unofficial beginning, or end, of the Nullarbor, a fishing village with enough shops to restock that got us all the way through to south of Port Augusta.
We stayed at Burra, an old mining village. Here there's an old ruin that's famous in Australia. A photo of this ruin graced the cover of Midnight Oil's Diesel and Dust album. Further south we ventured into an area known as the Coorong, an area that Liz has long wanted to see. We didn't stay very long because it was very cold, very windy and very wet, but we certainly felt like we had left the outback behind us and we were back into a more populated area, even though the Coorong is still considered fairly remote.
We then headed further east to Melbourne, where we visited our son Reese, his wife Claire and our 2 other grandchildren. From Melbourne we faced the well-worn path north to Dubbo for another quick visit with family, and then back home via a free camp where we often stop at Jerry's Plains.
And a last chance away from the bright lights of the coast to take a photo of the Milky Way.